Penguin Random House Audio presents Source Code, My Beginnings by Bill Gates. Read for you by Will Wheaton, with the prologue and epilogue read by the author. This is the author, Bill Gates. In memory of my parents, Bill Gates and Mary Maxwell Gates, and to my sisters, Christy and Libby. The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out. Richard P. Feynman. Prologue. When I was around 13, I started hanging out with a group of boys who met up for regular long hikes in the mountains around Seattle. We got to know each other as Boy Scouts. We did plenty of hiking and camping with our troop, but very quickly we formed a sort of splinter group that went out on our own expeditions. And that's how we thought of them, as expeditions. We wanted more freedom and more risk than the trips the Scouts offered. There were usually 5 of us: Mike, Rocky, Riley, Danny, and me. Mike was the leader. He was a few years older than the rest of us and had vastly more outdoor experience. Over the course of 3 years or so, we hiked hundreds of miles together. We covered the Olympic National Forest west of Seattle and Glacier Peak Wilderness to the northeast, and did hikes along the Pacific coast. We'd often go for 7 days or more at a stretch, guided only by topographic maps through old-growth forests and rocky beaches where we tried to time the tides as we hustled around points. During school breaks, we'd take off on extended trips, hiking and camping in all weather, which in the Pacific Northwest often meant a week of soaked, itchy Army surplus wool pants and pruny toes. We weren't doing technical climbing. No ropes or slings or sheer rock faces, just long, hard hikes. It wasn't dangerous beyond the fact that we were teenagers, deep in the mountains, many hours from help, and well before cell phones were a thing. Over time, we grew into a confident, tight-knit team. We'd finish a full day of hiking, decide upon a place to camp, and with hardly a word, we'd fall into our jobs. Mike and Rocky might tie up the tarp that would be our roof for the night. Danny foraged the undergrowth for dry wood, and Riley and I coaxed a starter stick and twigs into our fire for the night. And then we ate. Cheap food that was light in our packs, but substantial enough to fuel us through the trip. Nothing ever tasted better. For dinner, we'd chop up a brick of Spam and mix it with hamburger helper or a packet of beef stroganoff mix. In the morning, we might have Carnation instant breakfast mix or powder that with water transformed into a Western omelet, at least according to the package. My morning favorite, Oscar Mayer Smoky Links, a sausage billed as all meat, now extinct. We used a single frying pan to prepare most of the food, and we ate out of empty number 10 coffee cans we each carried. Those cans were our water pails, our saucepans, our oatmeal bowls. I don't know who among us invented the hot raspberry drink. Not that it was a great culinary innovation. Just add instant jello mix to boiling water and drink. It worked as dessert or as a morning sugar boost before a day of hiking. We were away from our parents and the control of any adults, making our own decisions about where to go, what to eat, when we slept, judging for ourselves what risks to take. At school, none of us were the cool kids. Only Danny played an organized sport, basketball, and he soon quit that to make time for our hikes. I was the skinniest of the group and usually the coldest, and I always felt like I was weaker than the others. Still, I liked the physical challenge and the feeling of autonomy. While hiking was becoming popular in our part of the country, not a lot of teenagers were traipsing off in the woods for 8 days on their own. That said, It was the 1970s, and attitudes toward parenting were looser than they are today. Kids generally had more freedom, and by the time I was in my early teens, my parents had accepted that I was different from many of my peers and had come to terms with the fact that I needed a certain amount of independence in making my way through the world. That acceptance had been hard-won, especially for my mother, but it would play a defining part in who I was to become. Looking back on it now, I'm sure all of us were searching for something on those trips beyond camaraderie and a sense of accomplishment. We were at that age when kids test their limits, experiment with different identities, and also sometimes feel a yearning for bigger, even transcendent experiences. I'd started to feel a clear longing to figure out what my path would be. I wasn't sure what direction it would take, but it had to be something interesting and consequential. Also in those years, I was spending a lot of time with a different group of boys. Kent, Paul, Rick, and I all went to the same school, Lakeside, which had set up a way for students to connect with a big mainframe computer over a phone line. It was incredibly rare back then for teenagers to have access to a computer in any form. The four of us really took to it, devoting all our free time to writing increasingly more sophisticated programs and exploring what we could do with that electronic machine. On the surface, the difference between hiking and programming couldn't have been greater, but they each felt like an adventure. With both sets of friends, I was exploring new worlds, traveling to places even most adults couldn't reach. Like hiking, programming fit me because it allowed me to define my own measure of success, and it seemed limitless, not determined by how fast I could run or how far I could throw. The logic, focus, and stamina needed to write long, complicated programs came naturally to me. Unlike in hiking, among that group of friends, I was the leader. Toward the end of my sophomore year, in June 1971, Mike called me with our next trip, 50 miles in the Olympic Mountains. The route he chose was called the Press Expedition Trail, after a group sponsored by a newspaper that had explored the area in 1890. Did he mean the same trip on which the men nearly starved to death and their clothes rotted on their bodies? Yes, but that was a long time ago, he said. 8 decades later, it would still be a tough hike. That year had brought a lot of snow, so it was a particularly daunting proposition. But since everyone else, Rocky, Riley, and Danny, was up for it, there was no way I was going to wimp out. Plus, a younger scout, a guy named Chip, was game. I had to go. The plan was to climb the Low Divide Pass, descend on the Quinault River, and then hike the same trail back, staying each night in log shelters along the way. 6 or 7 days total. The first day was easy, and we spent the night in a beautiful snow-covered meadow. Over the next day or two, as we climbed the Low Divide, the snow got deeper. When we reached the spot where we planned to spend the night, the shelter was buried in snow. I enjoyed a moment of private elation. Surely, I thought, we'd backtrack, head down to a far more welcoming shelter we had passed earlier in the day. We'd make a fire, get warm, and eat. Mike said we'd take a vote, head back or push on to our final destination. Either choice meant a several-hour hike. We passed a shelter at the bottom. It's 1,800 feet down. We could go back down and stay there, or we could continue on to the Quinault River, Mike said. He didn't need to spell out that going back meant aborting our mission to reach the river. What do you think, Dan? Mike asked. Danny was the unofficial second in command in our little group. He was taller than everyone else and a very capable hiker with long legs that never seemed to tire. Whatever he
Sample complete. Ready to continue?